Rachel Holt for NESN.com here with Ryan Fowler of Fox Sports with your look at fantasy football week 11. But first, Ryan, let's recap a great week 10. First off, there were some very exciting matchups this week that we can only dream of in the NFL world. We had Cowboys, Steelers, and of course the Patriots-Seahawks game, both coming down to the wire. They were very exciting to watch no matter which side of the fence you were on there. For you, what was the biggest fantasy surprise in week 10?
Well, I think let's start New England. Let's start up there in NESN country, and let's look at what LeGarrette Blount did against the Seahawks, because LeGarrette Blount's effort in that game is connected to what they're going to get out of Dion Lewis, I think, moving forward. Everybody under the sun thought Dion Lewis was this Christmas present that we were going to be able to open up in November and play him week in and week out. I don't know if that's the case. I mean, LeGarrette Blount is having a great year, leads the league in rushing touchdowns. I know him and Melvin Gordon have been going back and forth. But LeGarrette Blount is still going to be in the equation. And because he didn't regress over 10 weeks of play, I think they're not going to have to go out of their way to get Dion Lewis involved. Will he be involved? Yes. But I think everybody with Dion Lewis wants him to be that guy from a year ago where he broke out and had that great stretch of games and fantasy performances. It's hard to do coming off of these two injuries to think that, okay, it's week 11, LeGarrette Blount's on fire, and we're going to put Dion Lewis in there and give him 10 targets a game. I don't think it's that simple. Maybe if Gronk misses time due to injury, maybe he gets a little bit of a bigger role, but LeGarrette Blount's play in that game against the Seahawks really has me a little anxious of how they're going to use Dion Lewis in the coming weeks. That's not to say in weeks 13, 14, 15, 16, he couldn't, but I'm saying weeks 11 and 12, let's hit the pause button a little bit.
He had quite the game, and Doug Baldwin matching him with 3 touchdowns of his own there. Exciting stuff if you owned either of them on your fantasy teams. Let's talk about surprise performance in a bad way. Was there anyone who kind of shocked you with underperforming this week?
Well, one of my fantasy rosters across the board was pretty disappointing. But let's start in Arizona with J.J. Nelson. I think J.J. Nelson being named the number 2 receiver in the Cardinals' pass-happy offense, playing the 49ers, everybody thought that J.J. Nelson was going to have a chance to continue the 2-game stretch that he had. I mean, he was getting 19 targets over the previous 2 games. San Francisco's defense is what it is. Bruce Arians likes to throw the ball. Yes, it was a good matchup for David Johnson as far as the 49ers rush defense, but if you look at David Johnson's rush numbers, they weren't that great. But J.J. Nelson goes out there and in the first quarter fumbles. And if you know anything about Bruce Arians, that's going to get you right in the doghouse. And J.J. Nelson finished with like 2 fantasy points. And then to complicate matters even more moving forward, J.J. Nelson was one of the most added wide receivers and players heading into week 10. Michael Floyd, who everybody wanted to be the wide receiver 2 back in draft season and over the last few years, he goes out and has his best game of the year. So now we have this foggy conditions going into week 11 where it's like J.J. Nelson was named wide receiver 2. Michael Floyd comes out there and has over 100 yards receiving. What do we do? And here's the thing. It's not a simple, you just do this. Bruce Arians doesn't care about your fantasy team. And he's actually said that from the podium before when he's done his press conferences. So I don't think J.J. Nelson is completely out yet. I just think we might see a little bit more Michael Floyd because with his back up against the wall, he was able to perform. One other kind of a dud note was, again, we go back to these running backs that are just underperforming. And Lamar Miller had to leave the game a little bit. In Houston, they've been pounding the ball. Lamar Miller, he's still struggling to put consistent games together where people feel good about him as an RB1, and that's what he has to be with the amount of touches that he's getting. And he had to leave the game a little bit for injury, came back, but Akeem Hunt, one of the RB2s in that Texans backfield, played pretty well. So if you're in a deeper league or you're looking to take a lottery ticket on some guys, look at Akeem Hunt of the Texans, and then that kind of leads us into what do we do with Todd Gurley? I mean, this guy was a top 3 pick in almost every draft, and the Rams offense kind of is what it is. Kenny Britt miraculously can score double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues without getting in the end zone. But Todd Gurley gets 20 carries, and he gets you 5-6 points. They didn't give him the ball when they were on the doorstep. They were on the 2-1 yard line. They gave it to Benny Cunningham. That's a problem, and I don't know if there's a quick fix. And it's almost to the point where Todd Gurley is a flex option in standard scoring leagues, let alone PPR, where maybe you just bench him outright because there's probably somebody better out there. That's probably the biggest frustration right now is Todd Gurley.
Well, of course, there was a lot of frustrations for people, as you mentioned, but we're going to try to fix that moving into this week and try to get some people on the waiver wire that might make sense for Week 11. First off, Week 11 buys, Falcons, Broncos, Jets, Chargers not playing. So right there you have a lot of wide receivers not in the mix. Are there any receivers that you would pick up or target for this week?
Yeah, not only that, you lose Alshon Jeffrey for 4 games due to the PED suspension. So it's one of those things where people are going to be hammering that waiver wire for wide receivers. Now, here's the thing. When I wrote the little blurb on foxsports.com/fantasy about Alshon Jeffrey replacements, it's not a huge panic mode situation. Alshon was averaging about 12 fantasy points per game in PPR leagues. What hurts is Alshon had an average draft position about the 3rd round and wide receiver 13. That's what really stings, is that you're losing that asset. But he wasn't winning you ball games on a week-to-week basis. He only had 1 touchdown through 10 weeks of play. So when you go to the waiver wire, there are people that can hedge that production. I mean, 12 is not that hard to get to in PPR leagues. So you're going to look at Jamison Crowder. I think, again, you go back to Washington. They have Green Bay this week. The Packers' pass defense, I mean, Mariota tore it up last week. I mean, your Tajay Sharp finally had a breakout game, and it was against the Packers' pass defense. So you know how bad that is. And I think Jamison Crowder, even if Deshaun Jackson is healthy, is going to get enough looks to warrant the waiver wire claim. Also, Rashard Matthews of the aforementioned Titans. He's got 6 touchdowns in his past 6 games. Targets aren't crazy. But I think, again, when you're looking at how much they're going to pass against the Colts, it's a tasty matchup. You look at Rashard Matthews and maybe even Kendall Wright and Tajay Sharp. I think if you're in some deeper leagues where Rashard Matthews was picked up because he had 5 touchdowns in 5 games, maybe you look elsewhere to Tajay Sharp or Kendall Wright in a good matchup against the Colts. And then finally, back to Chicago, Cameron Meredith had a breakout stretch of 2 games when Brian Hoyer was behind center with Jeffrey out. Cameron Meredith is the quote-unquote guy to move up the depth chart. I don't know if that's a apples-to-apples, this is going to work situation, because Jay Cutler really hasn't targeted him since he took back the starting quarterback position. I really think Zach Miller at tight end is going to become the guy that sees more targets because of that, and then it'll be splintered among Meredith, Eddie Royal, and then even like Josh Bellamy in some deeper leagues. They might see some more targets there in Chicago. So that's kind of the landscape of wide receivers on the waiver wire this week.
All right, well, you mentioned Alshon Jeffrey. Let's talk about another injury that might shake things up in Week 11. Rob Gronkowski here for the Patriots. He said he suffered what he called the hardest hit of his career when Earl Thomas went after him in that Patriots-Seahawks game. It looked bad, and we're getting conflicting reports. Some people say he has a punctured lung. Others say it's a chest injury that's not too serious. So we don't really know yet what his status is, but we're guessing that he's not going to be in for Week 11. So if that is the case, what tight end can we look at?
Yeah, and if Rob Gronkowski does have a punctured lung, that guy's a freak of nature, because he went to the press conference and did a press conference with a punctured lung. That doesn't seem right. Just kind of an outsider looking in, not fantasy perspective. Just the guy goes to a press conference after the game with a punctured lung. Okay, Gronk's just kind of a different breed, as we know.
That's
but
like
as far as fantasy tight end,
right there.
Yeah, exactly. But as far as fantasy tight ends goes, Cameron Brate of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, not the easiest matchup against the Chiefs, but he is getting plenty of targets. Jameis Winston has trusted him since Vincent Jackson went to IR and when Doug Martin was out. Cameron Brate's available in about 50% of leagues. Eric Ebron, he's coming out of the bye, so he's kind of out of sight, out of mind. But heading into the bye in Week 10, Ebron was on a little bit of a hot streak. You could look that direction. And then Ladarius Green, I mean, they eased him back in with the Steelers, and they have the Browns this week. So Ladarius Green could be one of those things where if the waiver wire is picked over at tight end, Ladarius Green could see a little bit more targets. I don't think Jesse James is completely out of the equation with the Steelers tight end position, but Ladarius Green, if he was to play any softer of defense, if he was at 100%, Ladarius Green probably would be a top 10 tight end. So at whatever he is, 80, 85% coming off of short-term IR, I think he's going to be somebody that you would look to stream this week.
Well, you mentioned those Browns. Poor Cleveland this year, 0-10. And, by the way, this week they got the Steelers, so it doesn't get any easier for them in terms of that. If you are in a Survivor League, and you've made it this far because you've been smart enough to pick every team that's playing the Browns, can you do it again this week? Is the Steelers the pick of the week?
Yeah, the Steelers, they haven't looked great the last 2 weeks. Roethlisberger looked better against the Cowboys. The stats kind of tell the story of what Roethlisberger can do. The problem is the Steelers' defense, but when you put the Steelers defense against the Browns offense, it's not, oh my gosh, the world is ending. I think this is where the Steelers definitely bounce back and can put up some big points because they're probably pretty frustrated right now. And, Mike Tomlin, he's kind of on the hot seat. I think the way that this defense has played this year, Tomlin is not going to get a lot of passing grades on how this team has played overall. Yes, Ben missed some games, and yes, Ben's coming back from knee surgery, but it's the defense that's really letting them down. I mean, to let Dallas just go right down the field for the game winner, I thought that was a little bit different, and especially at home, too. Pittsburgh had been playing really well at home. They had only allowed 17.5 points per game at home. And then the Cowboys and Dak and Ezekiel, they just kind of ran through them. And Des Bryant, who had that big catch down the left sideline. But yeah, I mean, the Browns, Cody Kessler, Isaiah Crowell, Terrell Pryor, nice team, just not really a threat for the Steelers in survivor pools in Week 11.
All right, they're the team again. Man, they're due for a win. One of these weeks they're going to get one. We just don't know.
I don't know. Do you really think that they're going to win?
I hope so. Just for
Man, I have not found a game that they can win the rest of the way.
Hey, Cleveland had a good year otherwise, so we don't really
This
feel
is
too
true.
bad for them.
This is true.
We don't feel too bad. Any other things to keep in mind as we head into Week 11?
Yeah, I mean, we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. I mean, we're in Week 11, 12, 13, and then it's fantasy football playoffs. Some fantasy playoffs start in Week 13, and I know some trade deadlines are popping up, so if you have any trade questions, hit me up on Twitter at Fox Sports Fowler. And then we have chats 4 days a week. We had one last night. Great attendance on Monday night during Monday Night Football. We have a waiver wire chat on Tuesday night. We have another lineup chat, an injury update chat on Thursday at 3:30. And then on Sunday, 10 a.m. until 1 p.m., we answer all your lineup questions. So we'll keep it busy here as we get closer to the fantasy football playoffs.
And it's that playoff push time, so good luck everyone in Week 11. And Ryan, as always, thanks for chatting with us. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks.